Jimmy Momo Zones indicator that I think is officially 3 weeks old at this point. This indicator draws zones based on James LaFaith's ideas. If you want to know more about them, you should contact him on Twitter. He's at James LaFaith, or he's at Mullins Trading Academy, MTA. You can look them up. He is one of the nicest people that I've talked to in the entire trading world. He's incredibly knowledgeable. One conversation with him really changed how I look at trading. It got me really excited about this indicator and everything about his significant candles idea. So all this indicator does is it takes the most significant candles in a range and then draws some zones based on simple rules regarding those candles. So whenever you see a zone, it's going to be tied to one of the bigger candles within that zone. And there are 15 of them max. Default is 10 because that's the, for performance reasons, if you have a lot of charts that have a lot of zones on them, they don't render as fast. And so you want to make sure that you're using them judiciously. So the neat thing about these zones is they often accurately explain price information. Like you can see when it creates a zone, later it comes back to test that zone and gets rejected again. But sometimes zones are created that then get tested and broken through. And so you can see on these that or maybe you can, I have it pretty faded back. I'll show you how to change the colors later. But when the price action is below a zone, that zone is supply, and when it's above a zone, it's demand, and when it's below a zone, it's supply. And you can see as the price action moves through the zone, the supply, the demand here turns into supply, so it goes from green to red. So I want to show you a little bit how I use this and some tips about the indicator itself. So right now I'm on a 5-minute chart, 5-day, but if you change the range, this is based on the range, so it's the biggest candles within a certain range. So if you change the range to something like 1 day, you're going to see a lot more zones and more densely packed and overlapping. And that can be an indicator that there's something worth paying attention to. When zones are overlapping, they're reinforcing. And I mean, obviously, this is just something that I've noticed. I don't know that it has necessarily anything to do with James's ideas, and again, you should definitely look him up. MTA has some great educational material, and James's Twitter is just a gold mine of stuff. So to me, that kind of gives me places to start looking for future price activity, and what I'm tending to look for is for why things are turning where they turn. And whether I can connect that to a zone in one range or another. And you can see that between the 10-minute and the 5-minute and the 30-minute, the zones are in different places. And that's because the candles are in different configurations. Right now I have this set up. You can set it up to only to show extended hours or not. And I have this set up as a checkbox here. And I have it set to not show extended hours when I'm doing this kind of charting, only because I feel like the volume in the after hours isn't as high, and I like to see these gaps because these gaps tend to be powerful places for price to react off of later. And you can do that pretty easily if you go into the settings menu of your style, the style drop down. You can these little arrows to the right will let you pop that out into the main menu. So when you want to show extended hours, you have to go into equities. And then this is the show extended hours trading session checkbox, and you just want to push this so that it's solid, and then it'll show up in that drop down here. So it's nice. You can flip it on and off. It's very easy to do. So the idea for me, the way I tend to use this is that I'll start at a much bigger time period, like daily or weekly. I'll look at where the zones are being drawn, and then I'll manually draw them in for later, just to reinforce that, because some of these zones, I mean, if you're on a 10-minute chart, you're not going to see the daily zones. So I'll actually draw a rectangle here, and that's what these little lines here at the tops and bottoms, that's telling you where potential zones can be drawn, not necessarily where all of them are, but you can see this one. This one is definitely a zone here. It starts at the top of this candle and goes across, and this is just a pretty simple algorithm dealing with candle size, gaps, and everything else to figure out these zones under the hood. But you can see that this zone gets respected on the daily level here. It wicks into the zone and then takes off further. So what I like to do is set these zones here with a rectangle, and I'll draw it and label it for whatever day and date, but I just draw the rectangle between the two and then edit the properties of that once I create it, and then set the date to something that's much further in the future so that it can draw it all the way across. So now I have this zone drawn manually, and if I flip to a different time period, let's say let's go down to the 4 hour so that we can start seeing stuff. You can see that the 4 hour is actually starting to respect some of the zone, even all the way out here from January to now. You know, there's some respect still of that zone on the daily level, but you'd have to look at the price and how price moves through that area throughout time. You know, pick zones that make sense. You know, where on a larger level, if you're looking at the daily, you can see that level is kind of where price action is turning right now. So it's a helpful level, and it was also where when price broke through that, it paused, reset, and then went to its high. So there's, you know, I mean, obviously there's something about this level on the daily trend that makes it important. It may not be important anymore as price action moves through it. It can be less useful as a zone. But what we're really looking for is drawing these zones in important places. And so I'll draw them on the 8 hour, the 4 hour, and I'll tend to relabel them depending on which zone it is, because right now I have rectangle 1 and rectangle 2. So what I'll do with this is say this is a 4 hour supply zone because it's overhead, and then I'll usually put the date, you know, so that I can just, you know, look at the properties and see exactly when it is. But then I'll set the date to something in the future so that it makes that pushed out further, and then I can see, you know, the overlapping zones. So anyway, that's the way I tend to use it. And then when trading, what you can do is go into the indicator itself, and then there's an option here to show the zones, yes or no. And if you say no, then when you apply that, all of those zones disappear except for the ones that I've drawn. So that's just one way that I sometimes use it to clear my chart. So I'll use it to help me visualize the zones on different levels and then draw them in. But often what I'll do is I'll go into a smaller time frame, like scalp the 1 minute. So I can see this is in a zone, sure. I mean, but how helpful is that on a micro level? So what you can do here is go into the zone setting, or the indicator settings, and you can change the from the chart range. So chart range is saying this is a 2 day 1 minute, so it's going to find the largest candles in a 2 day range because that's the chart range, and draw zones based on that. But you can say no, I want to have it based on bars or days, and days is approximate. It's saying, you know, I want you to draw zones from the last 3 days, regardless of whether I'm on a 10-day chart or a 30-day chart. And that just tends to make the zones denser. And like I said, the zones are at a 10 default, but they can go up to 15. And if you make this bars and go to the last 100 bars, what you'll see is that these zones are very tightly drawn. Actually, I have to go show my zones again. Which makes it helpful when you're trading on a micro level. These zones are going to be created as the candles are drawn. So like you can see that like as these candles are drawn, these zones are popping into existence, and you can start seeing where the zones are overlapping. And that's actually really handy for when you're, you know, scalping or trying to find places where price might turn. But again, I mean, look at James Lefaith's Twitter to really understand what's going on here and why and how to play these zones. So that's one way of sort of maximizing the area of these is to set it up so that you're only looking at 100 bars or a certain number of days. But often what I'll do is just leave it on chart range. There's a stats label here that will let you see kind of a rough estimate of the zone itself, and how well this it's not filling for some reason, how well this time range and period react to these zones at all. And so if the indicator is green and has higher numbers, then there's a pretty good chance that it will there we go. So it'll show the range. So this is 389 bars, 209 bars total that are being used, and it's 15 out of 50, so it's drawing all 15 of the zones. Sometimes it doesn't draw all of the zones because of, you know, just the way the algorithm is set up. It doesn't always run through all of them, but Anyway, so when this is green, it tends to mean that there's better respect of the zone. You can see, the 209 total is the number of candles that it shows as potential zones. So there's 209 out of 389 bars. 209 of them are potential zones. And as you flip through different time periods, and different scales, you can look in between them and say, this is 226 for the 5-minute 10-day. And for the 10-minute 10-day, it's 209, and then if you change it to like 30-minute 10-day, and you want to keep one of the variables the same, so the time interval here hasn't changed, and you can see which time intervals are more respected, have more response to them. There are just fewer bars in this one, so you probably want to do that on bars to see the totals. But some tickers respect some zones better than others, and this is just kind of a rough indication of which ones may be more important to look at. And you can see at a micro level, these zones are still being respected within this bigger daily area. You have these smaller zones being built. So that's the stats label. I usually have that off because I kind of know at this point which ones respect which zones more. It tends to be 5 and 10-minute zones on the large cap tickers that I play. But I'm using the chart range, and obviously this range here doesn't matter. If you're using chart range, it'll just use the number of bars in the chart. There's this use expansive bars, which I left in mostly because of aesthetics. I thought that it uses a slightly different algorithm to draw where it wants to draw the zones, and so it'll make them bigger, and so they overlap more, which can sometimes indicate important areas just by the highlights. You can see these areas here are more active. Which makes sense. This is where price is turning. So it gives you a visual indicator of where to look for when you're drawing your zones in, and then it kind of gives you areas to draw those zones. One of the other things that you may want to do is change the color scheme, and that can be done. You can ignore this whole plots area. It doesn't really do anything. It's just what draws those the little lines, the suggestion lines in the first place. But if you go into globals, the indicator, originally the indicator I think starts out as really bright, but I like them dimmed back a lot. So I go into more and then HSV and turn the transparency way down on mine. And that's just because I like these to be faded back. And I've done that for long and short as well. But you can make them whatever colors you want and whatever transparency. There will always be a slight transparency to it, but you can make them more transparent just so that they're not as... you can't do that from the script, but when you go into this globals area, you can change the transparency to be a little more transparent so that they're not as disruptive, which is kind of handy. So anyway, that's the Jimmy Momo Zones, and I'd love to hear any feedback of people using it. Sounds like some people have been using it and it's been working pretty well for them. So yeah, definitely let me know how it goes. Thanks.